plus and with the help of the directions of the 12-step programs of AA and Al-Anon, I can say that today all is well in my world. I couldn't always say that. For the first 50 years of my life, I was busy trying to run and win the rat race. I was a human doing, not a human being. I was really a double loser. But God loves me so much that he put a bunch of alcoholics in my family. And in September of 1978, I began attending Al-Anon meetings. It's interesting that the fifth tradition in AA and the fifth tradition of Al-Anon are not quite the same. AA's fifth tradition says our primary purpose is to give help to the still suffering alcoholic. The fifth tradition in Al-Anon is a little more specific. It says each family group, each Al-Anon family group, has but one purpose: to help families of alcoholics. The next line is the real kicker. We do this by practicing the 12 steps of AA ourselves. Well, the 12 steps of AA is the big book of AA. So I went out and I got myself a copy of the big book. It was in the second edition. I read it, and I reread it, and I reread it. And I started going to open AA meetings. But you know, I heard the music, but I really wasn't ready to put the words together. So for the next dozen years, the Al-Anon Fellowship and program sort of guided me through the minefields of my own good intentions. Then on Labor Day in 1991, Mary and I were visiting some friends at the Berkshire Music Festival in Lenox, Mass. And I was at an open AA meeting. I was asked to share. And I got up, and I had no idea where it came from or how it came out, but I said, my name is Stan, and I am an alcoholic. It's said that we get into these rooms to save our ass, only to discover that it's attached to our soul. Well, what happened was, over the years, and very slowly, the icicles in my soul began to melt. I began to get in touch with my feelings. I can now say that it is possible for me to do what I have to do, and knowing that if I'm doing God's will and not Stan's will, all is fine. I've learned that the will of God will never ever take me to where the grace of God won't protect me. Thanks to Marianne and Jeff, I have the pleasure of introducing our Al-Anon speaker tonight. I've never met Bo before tonight, before this event, but thanks to the magic of Len Kay's Tape of the Month Club, I think I probably know him as well as many of the members of my home group. Bo, would you please come up and share your story with us?
Hi. I'm an Al-Anon from Alabama, and my name's Bo Templin. Hey, y'all. Y'all is about as close as I can get to aloha. I think that y'all might be a deep south aloha. Thank you for allowing us to be here. And thank you, Stan, for, I was getting comfortable. I wanted to hear the rest of your story. I think we ought to do that soon. Thank you for loving me and my wife enough that you invited us out here to be a part of this celebration. And you see, that's what we view this as. We view this weekend as a celebration of recovery. As you learn more about us tonight, you will learn that we were introduced to this way of life Labor Day weekend, 1982, at the party. And we fell in love with you at that party. Labor Day weekend, 1982. We had picked my wife up at a treatment center at 12 noon on Saturday, Labor Day weekend, with instructions to go straight to Bessemer, Alabama, where we would meet up with a bunch of folks. And then we would go on down south to a place called Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And that's the home of the University of Alabama. And there we would attend an AA Al-Anon anniversary. We didn't know what that was. But we followed directions, and we went down there and met up with you folks, and then we got into that convoy that I'll talk about in a little bit. And we convoyed down the road to Tuscaloosa, and we walked in that room that night, and there was 500 of y'all. And we fell in love with you. You were running around that place, and you were cleaned up, and you were dressed up, and you had on foo-foo juice, and you was running around, and you was laughing, and you was hugging, and we didn't know a whole lot about you, and we didn't really know what you had. But we knew that whatever it was infinitely better than what we brought to the table. And that thing about attraction rather than promotion, we fell in love with you. And that love affair started that night and has led to us being right here with you at the Big Bash this weekend. So we thank you. Yeah. I also want to tell you this. I used to get up here and try to do this, and my throat would start crackling. It'd get dry, and my voice would start popping. And we were at one of these things one weekend, and there was an old guy from North Carolina named Bryant B. And I love that guy, and I love to hear him talk. Brian's just like me. He has a real dry throat. And he just had him a big old pitcher of ice water sitting up there at the podium. And he talked for an hour and a half that day, and his throat never got dry. So I don't know how much water we got here, and don't know how long I'm going to talk, but you'll see me sipping on that water. The other thing I want to tell you is that you're going to see me moving around and leaning a little bit crazy tonight and leaning on this podium. 7 weeks ago, I had some pretty serious back surgery. And but the beautiful part about it is the pain is gone, and I don't hurt anymore. But I'm still in that rehab process, and my back's still kind of weak, and that old brace that I have to wear, it looks like a turtle shell, and it's real hot. And I decided that tonight I'd try to do this thing without the turtle shell on. So you'll see me my left foot's still numb. And that's a weird thing for me, so I'm moving my left foot around all the time because I think about it. I say, where is it? You know, we was coming through the airport yesterday, and I was tripping and falling, and I couldn't figure out why I was tripping and falling. And Shirley was hollering at me, and I was this piece of luggage there, and I was just kicking heck out of that luggage, and didn't even know it, you know. So. But if you just bear with me, we'll get through this thing. There's a couple of thank yous that I want to get out of the way right quick. And of course, the first one was to thank the committee for allowing us to be here and to be part of this thing. The second thank you tonight is if you're sitting in this room and you are a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, from the very bottom of this old Al-Anon's heart, I want to say thank you to AA. Yeah. And I want to say thank you for a couple of reasons. I want to thank you for being there 19 and a half years ago when my gal reached out her hand. Because, you see, I'd lost her. The bottle had her and I couldn't do anything about it. And I was driving myself crazy trying to find a way to get her sober and to keep her sober. And, of course, you know that I never could push that right button. But when she reached out her hand in 1982, and she had that moment of clarity that I think all recovering people have. And when she had that moment of clarity and reached out her hand, you had the hand of AA there for her. And you took her in and you put your arms around her and you loved my gal back to health. You see, she was dying of a fatal disease that we didn't even know she had. And because of Alcoholics Anonymous being there and putting their arms around her and loving her back to health, she didn't have to die. God, I can't ever thank you enough for that. And because you were there and you had Al-Anon there that I got involved in and you had Alateen there that we introduced 2 teenage kids to, we were able to put this family back together. And as a result of that, if she'll behave herself, yeah, if she'll behave herself till the 30th day of this month, we're going to celebrate anniversary number 38. Yeah. And we owe that to rooms like this full of folks just like you. That's where we learned it. I want to thank AA for another reason. I want to thank you for knowing from the very beginning that alcoholism is a family disease. Now, you see, I know that you knew it from the beginning because I've been raised by old-time sponsors. And I'll tell you several ways during my talk that my old-time sponsors have handled me and things that they do, and you might determine whether you have old-time sponsorship or not. One of the ways that my old-time sponsors sponsor me is they have raised me in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. They believe in the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous, and I believe in the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's just like Stan was saying in his introduction, our fifth tradition tells us that we practice the 12 steps of AA ourselves. And I don't know where the 12 steps of AA are better explained than in the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. So I've been raised in the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. I have been taught the history of our fellowships. Old-time sponsors make sure that we know our history. And so by being taught this history, I know that the very first meetings were family meetings where the whole family went together. And the family was included by Alcoholics Anonymous from the very beginning. And some 16 years after AA was born, when it was time for us to be born, and we reached out and said, can we have your 12 steps? You loved us enough that you threw your arms open and said, sure, well, you can, Bo. And here's what we want you to do. We want you to come on in here and take these 12 spiritual principles. And we want you to learn how to implement these spiritual principles in your life on a daily basis, where you can be happy, joyous, and free, and it not be dependent on what another person does or does not do. And for that, I'll be eternally grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to thank the tapers. Thank Glenn and his bunch. You know, these people work hard. What a great way for us to carry the message. We are here this weekend, and we're relaxed and kicked back, and we're enjoying ourselves, and Glenn and his bunch are working to make sure that these are recorded so that they can be passed on. Now, let me tell you again about old-time sponsorships, because I want you to know for sure why I thank the tapers. My sponsors know that I've got an out-of-town talk. And they know that I've got an ego. Now, you AAs find that hard to believe that we Al-Anons have egos. But we do. So here's the way my sponsors take control of me in that area. I never know when I get home from one of these things when they're going to say, bring that tape by. Because they know that the tapers always give us a copy of our talk. And I never know when I get home which one they're going to want to listen to. So I'd come back in one time from a weekend and been off, and let me make sure you understand, Glenn was not the taper at that conference. But I got home and called my sponsor on Monday, and Jim and Fran said, bring that tape by this afternoon and let's listen to it. So I went by their house that afternoon, and we sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and we put that tape in, and just as they get me introduced, and just as I'm to start talking, there's this loud hum, and it starts in that, and it just drowns me out. And you can't hear me for the hum. And it goes on, and we fast-forwarded it some, and it went all the way through the tape, and I looked at Jim, and I said, Jim, there's something wrong with that man's equipment. And Jim's just laughing like crazy. I said, what are you laughing about? He said, there's nothing wrong with his equipment, Bo. You didn't thank the taper. So thank you, Glenn. When I introduced myself to you a few minutes ago, I introduced myself as an Al-Anon. Let me talk about that for just a minute. Because you see, when I got here Labor Day weekend 1982, I thought being married to Shirley made me an Al-Anon. And what I learned is that being married to Shirley qualifies me for Al-Anon. It doesn't make me an Al-Anon. And there's several things that I do today on a real regular basis in order to remain a member of Al-Anon, and I want to share those things with you. The first thing I do today on a regular basis in order to tell you that I'm an Al-Anon is I suit up and show up and I occupy a chair in an Al-Anon meeting on a real regular basis. Now, I know that there's more to it than suiting up and showing up and occupying that chair. I know that this is a program of action. I know that I've got to participate in my own recovery because I know you can't get it by osmosis, because the first 7 months that I was around this thing, that's what I tried to do. I tried to rub up against you and get your recovery to rub off on me. And it just doesn't work that way. So I know it's a program of action, but it starts with suiting up and showing up and occupying that chair. Let me explain it to you this way. We can take that chair and take it out to the back of the yard, and we can set that chair in the middle of the chicken coop. And I can occupy that chair in the middle of that chicken coop every day for 20 years. And guess what? Yeah, I still won't be a chicken. Yeah. But how about this? Think about this for just a minute. If I do that every day for 20 years, at the end of that time, I'm going to know a whole lot about chickens. And I'm going to know how the successful chickens are getting it done. Do you hear what I'm saying? It's by suiting up and showing up and occupying that chair in that Al-Anon meeting with you winners that were there for me when I got here, that I could begin to watch you, and I could begin to see the changes that I was going to have to make in my life if I wanted to be like you when I grew up. So it starts with suiting up and showing up and occupying that chair. Okay? The next thing that I do in order to tell you that I'm an Al-Anon, and remember now this is just what's worked for me, is I have to have a home group. Now I didn't need a home group when I got here. I didn't need Al-Anon when I got here. There was nothing wrong with me. She had the problem, and if we took care of her problem, and if she didn't drink again, we were going to be okay. And that's what I told you when I came. Now that treatment center that she went to, they had something up there called Family Week. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But it was where me and the kids went up there and moved in and stayed for 5 days. And while we were up there, I heard a couple of things up there that made a whole lot of sense to me. The first thing I heard up there was that those that stay sober are the ones that go to AA. And in a flash, my job in life changed. Yeah. The next thing I heard up there was it's a good idea to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And we did. Now, if you're an Al-Anon, you understand that. But you see, my new job now was to make sure she was there. So we were going to these 90 meetings in 90 days, and we were sitting right down there on the front row. And I'm right there beside her, and that speaker say something important, and I'd pop her with that elbow. Yeah. And I'm listening real close, you see, because she's still foggy. I know she is. And she's going to have some questions, and I've got to be able to answer them. So I'm paying close attention. And we're going to these 90 meetings. Boy, we're just going to these 90 meetings, and I learned something about you AAs during that period. I learned that y'all got real serious tunnel vision about 2 or 3 different things. And one of the things you've got real serious tunnel vision about is something called closed meetings. Because the night came and we showed up there at Bessemer, and it was a closed meeting. And you AAs met me there at the door and said, Bo, this is a closed meeting. It's for alcoholics only. You can't stay in here. I said, you don't understand. My goodness, this is, they said, no. No, you need to turn her over to us. And there's a meeting over there in that other room over there that you've been needing to go to for a while. And they not so gently nudged me toward the door of my first Al-Anon meeting there in Bessemer. Now, I've got to tell you that I was still in the ism at that time. And the ism for me is I sponsor myself. That's what it means. And what this meant that night was, you see, it was 2 minutes to 8 when I walked up that door. I don't do that anymore. I got old-time sponsors, and my old-time sponsors have raised me and taught me to be at every meeting I go to at least 30 minutes early, prepared to stay until it's over. They've taught me that there's no such thing as a 1-hour meeting, that a lot of meetings are over in 1 hour. But if it needs 2 hours or if it needs 3 hours, you show up 30 minutes early, prepared to stay till it's over. Well, I didn't have those sponsors at that time, so I was sponsoring myself. First 7 months I was here, I sponsored myself. I had a fool for a sponsor. I walked up to that door and I looked in there and I took a quick head count, and there was 23 women. Yeah, one other guy. I hustled down there and I got a seat by him because it was 2 minutes to 8. And we had the meeting, and then the meeting was over, and we said the Lord's Prayer, and he turned around and introduced himself to me, and I said, Kirvin, I sure am glad there's one other guy here. He said, oh, Bo, he said, I'm moving to Florida in the morning. But you see, what I didn't realize at the time is that was God looking out for Bo. Because you see, I was so sick, it's taken all 23 of those gals from me. And if Kirvin had hung around and had a problem, I don't know what we'd have done. I kept them real busy. The meeting was over that night, and those gals were coming up there, and they were thanking me for being there and welcoming me and asking me to come back. And I'm telling them, well, wait a minute. Well, y'all don't understand. I don't need this. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm only in here because they won't let me stay out there. And the nights that they won't let me stay out there, I'll be glad to come in and sit in with you. And you know what they did? They just smiled and grinned and hugged me and told me to keep coming back. And they began to use some hooks on me to very gently pull me into this thing and keep me there until my miracle happened. Hooks that I didn't even know existed. The first hook that they started using on me was one called laughter. Man, think back to when you first got here. How important was, let's don't ever lose the laughter. If for nothing else, for the newcomer. Man, there just hadn't been much laughter in my life for a while. And that place was full of laughter. I think back to that first meeting that night, and it was a speaker meeting. And one of our seasoned veterans, those gals won't let me call them old-timers, one of our seasoned veterans was going to tell her story that night. And she got up there to the podium and she said, hi, my name's Doris, and it's been 14 years since I had to plan a murder. And the whole room erupted in laughter, you know. Everybody except me. I didn't say a word, but in my mind I'm saying, nope, I wouldn't have said that. Not out loud. Because I was like some of you in here, I've been planning that murder too. Yeah, I was going to kill her and tell God she died. And Doris's talk was full of that laughter, just full of humor. And we laughed all night long, and I realized before I left that place that night that nobody was laughing at her. Everybody was laughing. She was laughing more than anybody. Yeah, the laughter. The next hook that they began to use on me that they still use today is something called hugs. We're a hugging group. Now, you know, you walk up to me and stick your hand out, I'm going to say, please, could I have a hug? I probably will say that to you. Because we believe in hugging down there, and we hug you when you get there, and we hug you before you go home. And in the middle of a meeting, if you're in pain and you're hurting, you know, somebody may just get up and walk across the room and give you a hug, because we believe in the healing power of those hugs. Now, here's what those gals did for me, because I didn't want those hugs. They put a door right inside the room of the Al-Anon room, and it was way back at the back. And the podium's way down at the other end, down front. And they said, Bo, we know you don't want to be here, so this is as far into this room as you have to come. This is your chair, and the nights that you are here, nobody else can occupy this chair but you. And then they did something, and they didn't tell me about it. They assigned a gal to me. And they changed gals on a monthly basis. We believe in rotation. And this gal's job was to get between me and the door when we closed the meeting, to give me that going home hug. Well, in my home group in Bessemer, this is the way we close the meetings. We stand and we hold hands and we say the Lord's Prayer. Now here again, I've been sponsored by old timers. And the old timers have taught me that the Lord's Prayer ends with the word amen. So at my home group, we don't say anything after the word amen. We close with the Lord's Prayer. When we say amen, the meeting's over. So what this girl would do is, while we got our eyes closed saying the Lord's Prayer, she'd slip out of the circle. And she'd get between me and the door. Yeah. Now, they still won't admit it today, but I know that's what they did. Because I'd say amen, let go, and turn for the door, and there she was. And as she hugged me, she would whisper those infamous words into my ear. You keep coming back, Bo, because we need you. Well, God, if you needed me. I mean, I was going to be bringing her anyhow. I'd also been reading some of your literature and listening to some of the things you said. I didn't tell you that. But the miracle was happening. The miracle was happening. Because of these tools that you use, these hooks that you use. The last hook that I can tell you about tonight that we have time to share about is one that they started using that very first night and they still use with me today. And that's a hook called unconditional love. Those gals began to just cover me up and fill me up with unconditional love that very first night. And they still do that today. And several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I began to get very concerned about this thing called unconditional love. I knew that I had become an absolute pro, an expert at receiving unconditional love. What I began to get concerned about was, am I doing a good enough job at returning that unconditional love to you? And so I began to set out on this venture to learn more about unconditional love. And when we would go off to these things, I'd get you long-timers and you seasoned veterans. And I'd get up against you and I'd ask you 100 questions over the weekend about unconditional love. And I was getting everybody's opinion about it. And I was getting more and more confused as I went. And then a year ago in April, I was over in San Diego at their spring thing. And we were sitting in there on a Friday night, and they had an AA speaker. And I'm going to tell you something, this man, he has and still has, he had then and still has today, a relationship with God that is beautiful. And he was standing up there sharing his story, and he was talking about his relationship with God. And he said, you know what I've come to realize today is that my job is to stay in tune with God. He says, if I can get this relationship going up this way, okay, with God, then I become God's tool. And God can love you through me. He said, now, if you'll work on your relationship with God, and you'll stay spiritually fit, and you'll stay okay with God, then God will use you as an instrument of His will, and He'll love me through you. And the light bulb went on one more time. Dummy, you've been working on the wrong thing again. Here you are trying to become more proficient in unconditional love when there's only one that's really perfect at unconditional love, and that's God. And all I got to do is work on my relationship today with God so that I can be an instrument of His will, and God can love you through me. And that's my deal with unconditional love today. The next thing I'd share with you that I'd do in order to tell you I'm an Al-Anon is I'm sponsored. Now, I've talked enough about sponsorship now that you ought to believe that. Let me tell you this much. I'm one of those sick ones. And God knew how sick I was. I've got an AA and an Al-Anon sponsor. Now, here's the way that happened. When after 7 months of being around here and getting sicker and sicker, and it was time for me to get a sponsor, there were no other male Al-Anons in my area. So I picked a female to be my sponsor. Let me tell you about her. She's old enough to be my mama. She's a retired school teacher, and there's a disciplinarian side to her that I didn't know existed till I invited her into my life. She's a past delegate. She's raised in service, and she believes in service. If Fran was here with us tonight, she would tell you that the night that I asked her to be my sponsor, that she had a temporary lapse of sanity. But she put a condition on it. And thank goodness she put this condition on it. She said, Bo, I'll sponsor you, but I'll sponsor you the only way I know how. And that's the way I was sponsored. And I said, well, how is that, Fran? She said, in the steps, son. In the steps. If you're ready to take these 12 spiritual principles and implement in your life, then I'm ready to take you by the hand and walk with you. And that's what she's done for the last 19 years. About 90 days into this thing, we knew I needed to talk to a man about some issues. She sent me out there in that AA room. She said, you pick you one that's working a good 12-step program, and we'll make him part of this relationship. And I happened to pick the one she'd been married to forever. And so I've had the best of AA, you see, and the best of Al-Anon at my disposal for the past 19 years. What a loving God it is that would give me a gift like that. Yeah. The last thing I'd share with you that I do today in order to tell you I'm an Al-Anon is I take those 12 simple steps that I've mentioned a couple of times. 12 simple steps for a very complicated person. And to the best of my ability, I incorporate them in my life on a daily basis. I get up every morning and I suit up and I show up and I talk with God and I ask God to come into my life and direct my life today. And then I go out there and I put one foot in front of the other and try to do His will. Now that's real easy to do when I'm at the Big Bash in Kona, surrounded by folks like you. It's a little bit tougher when I'm back home down there in Alabama and I'm driving down the interstate and that idiot cuts me off. You know. But what I know today is it's not that important how good I do on a daily basis. What's important is, have I invited God in and am I out there on the firing line being the best Bo that I can be? And these are the things I do today in order to tell you I'm a member of Al-Anon. Let me real quickly tell you a few little things about me and about how I got here, and then we're going to talk about how it is today. Go back and tell you about me, I have to start with this simple statement. I was born at a very early age. Now, I have to go back and start there because, you see, I was born down there in the middle of that deep south. I was born right in the middle of something called a Bible Belt, a Southern Baptist Bible Belt. Yeah. And I was raised in a very strict, very religious Southern Baptist home. Now, I don't know if we was spiritual, but let me tell you, we was religious. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, we was in that Southern Baptist church out there in Hueytown, Alabama. And this went on up through my late teens till I left home. Now, what's important about this time is that it was in that Southern Baptist church that I formed a concept of God that was going to cause me some trouble. Now, it was not the church's fault. I remember that the church taught me about God being loving and God being forgiving. But when I grew up, for some reason, the concept that I brought into adulthood was a concept that God's going to get you. He's out looking for you, and He's going to get you. And, you know, Hector, you shaking your head. You know, you don't even have to do it. Just think it, and you're guilty. That's Southern Baptist. And I done thought my way into hell. I knew that. And I had a very judging and a very punishing God. And this was my relationship with God when I found the doors of Al-Anon. Now, I was raised in that religious home. I wasn't around any drinking and wasn't exposed to it and didn't know anything about it and didn't drink. Met Shirley in my mid-teens, and we started dating. As she'll tell you later tonight, she comes from that broken alcoholic home. And that was enough reason for her not to drink. The deal is, she didn't drink. So neither one of us drank, and we met and we dated for 5 years. And there was no drinking. And we finally decided we were going to be able to get along, and we set the date, and we got married, and we set out on this thing called a Great American Dream. Y'all know about that. It's called chasing the dollar. That's what we knew about life. Our conception of being successful was to make a whole lot of money and live in the big house on top of the hill and have all the nice stuff. And the more nice stuff you had, the more successful you were deemed to be. And that's what we wanted to do. So we both had good jobs, and we believed in hard work, and we set out and we started working. And it took us a year, and we'd saved up a down payment, and we bought that first home out there in Hueytown. And we moved in. 3.5 years after we was married, God gave us the most beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde-headed baby boy. And Mike became a part of the Great American Dream. 17 months later, along came the most beautiful, healthy, brown-eyed baby girl, and Sissy became a part of the Great American Dream. And we took stock, and we had 2 kids, we had 2 cars, we had 2 jobs, we had a house. Everything we had was mortgaged to the hilt, and we was happy, chasing that dollar. We thought that's what life was about. Well, Shirley went back to work after Sissy was born, and she was asked to join this social sorority there in Bessemer. And she did. Boy, I tell you what, y'all better. I used to see Southern Baptist preachers do that, and we was in for the afternoon. Take that shirt off and loosen that tie, and it's fixing to get right. Oh, man, don't nobody bring no fried chicken up here now. So Shirley got involved in this sorority, and we went to a party one night late in the summer on the Warrior River there in Alabama, not too far out of Hueytown, and it gets real, real hot in the summertime there in Alabama. And this was a hot summer, and it was probably 95, 100 degrees, and we're down there at the river. And not only does it get to be 95 degrees in Alabama, it'll be about 90% humidity, where you just stand under the tree and sweat. That's all you do. You don't even have to move. And we're down there, and this place was beautiful, and the lawn was manicured, and the lights were strung out there, and the lights were low, and the music was soft, and the moon was reflecting off of that river, and the mood was just right. And I gave my wife the first drink of alcohol she ever had. And I said, "Here, honey, drink this." And it wasn't 2 or 3 years later, she was right up in my face, shaking her finger. And she was saying things like, "Bo, if you had never given me that drink, I wouldn't be the way I am today." Well, you see, we didn't know anything about alcoholism. Didn't know. Didn't know that her dad, and that it was in her family. And that, we didn't know. All I knew is that my relationship with my wife was changing. And that my relationship with the kids was changing. And our financial situation was changing. And it wasn't for the better. And so what I did was I agreed with her. And I absolved her of any guilt or responsibility for anything that happened as a result of the drinking. And I took on a load of guilt that was to grow heavier and heavier and heavier before I found the doors of Al-Anon. Now, I could stand up here for hours tonight and share war stories with you about our trip through active alcoholism, but we just don't have time for that. But I've learned something about war stories over the years. And what I've learned is that my war stories and your war stories are pretty much the same. Oh, the times are different, and the places are different, and the names are different. But if you get all that out of the way, you know what's the same? The pain. That's what war stories are about. They're about pain. And I know that our pains are pretty much the same. We hurt a whole lot alike. So what I want to do for a minute or two is share with you a few of the pains that I experienced on our trip through active alcoholism. And the first pain I share with you is that pain of guilt that I've already told you about, that was to grow heavier and heavier and heavier as long as the drinking continued. The next pain I share with you is a pain called anger. I don't know about you, but let me tell you about me. On a good day, I got up angry, and I went to bed angry. And on a bad day, I got up angry, and I went to bed in a blind, running rage. And toward the end of the act of drinking, if you had set me down, I probably couldn't even have told you who I was angry at or what I was angry about. I just knew that everything in my life seemed to be a legitimate cause for anger. And I also knew that I hadn't been raised that way, but I couldn't find a way out. The next pain I'd share with you is a pain called resentment. And I didn't know what a resentment was until I got here and you taught me. But as I look back, I realized I was living my life full of resentment. Because you see, the time had now come that if you lived up the street from me and I saw you and your family out in the yard doing something together, cooking out or cutting grass or washing the car, just doing anything together, I resented you. Because you see, alcoholism had robbed us of that. We didn't do things together anymore. If I saw you and your family get in your car and come by my house going somewhere together, I resented you. Because alcoholism had taken that away. And we didn't go places together as a family anymore. And of course, when you came by our house, if your car was nicer than mine, I resented you. Because alcoholism had taken the nice things and we didn't have them anymore. But the biggest resentment of all, the biggest resentment by far, was my resentment at God. Because you see, in my mind, God was continuing to punish me. And He was punishing me through Shirley's drinking for being the one that gave her the first drink and setting this whole thing in motion. And my relationship with God went something like this. Well, my God, God, how much longer are you going to do this? Good God, God, how much more of this do you think I can take? Was putting that drink in her hand really that bad? Yeah, and that was my relationship with God when I found the doors of Al-Anon. Yeah. The next pain that I would share with you is a pain that I hear alcoholics talk about a lot. It's a pain called loneliness and isolation. And I believe you when you tell me that alcoholism is a disease of loneliness and isolation. What I want you to know is that you ain't got a corner on that market. I know about loneliness and isolation too, and it has very little to do with how many people are in the room. Some of the loneliest times of my life have been in crowded rooms, surrounded by people that I knew, some that I even thought to be my friends. And we would be at whatever gathering, and I would look around at them, and they're laughing, and they're cutting up, and they're enjoying their life, and they're having a good time. And I've got that old fixed smile, you know, the one that hurts our teeth, you know, remember that one? And I'm wanting so bad to cry out at them and say, how can you be so happy? If you had a drunk wife at home like I've got that you can't sober up, you wouldn't be that happy. And I would want to cry out to them and say, tell me what to do. Tell me something that I haven't tried. But of course the red flag went up before I did that. You don't tell anybody. You don't tell anybody about it. Because you see, if I told you about it, then I had to face that other pain that was consuming me. And that's a pain called failure. Because I'm the Southern dad. I'm the head of the family. And I'm supposed to be able to fix anything that comes along. And I couldn't fix my drunk wife. And this is the way I was living my life in July of 1982. Kids were teenagers now. Mike was 15, Sissy was 13. We were 4 individuals living 4 separate lives under one roof out there in Hueytown. A home completely ravished, completely torn apart by a disease that we didn't even know we had. And it's late July 1982, and the kids and I are going to one more softball game, and once again we haven't asked Shirley to go. But this was okay with Shirley. She didn't want to go. Because see, we'd be gone 4 or 5 hours. And this would give her time to do what she did in her kitchen without us being there looking over and nagging. So Sissy and I were in the car that night, sitting in the driveway, waiting on Mike, and he's running just a minute late. And Mike comes to the door, and I see him stop. He's 15 years old, about a half a head taller than his mom. And he and his mom talk for just a minute or two. And then Mike comes on and gets in the car. Now, it was a couple of years later before I knew exactly what went on in that conversation. But I want to share that with you because it was the turning point. Mike looked at his mom that night as he was leaving, and he said, "Mom, when I get home tonight, you're going to be passed out on the couch or passed out on the floor, or we're going to have to step over you. Where are you going to be passed out, Mom?" Because, see, that was Shirley's deal. She would start drinking, and once she started, she couldn't stop. And she would drink until she passed out. Some nights she made it to bed. Most nights she didn't. And Shirley stood there, and she raised her hand to slap his teeth out. And when she raised her hand to slap his teeth out, the scene flashed through her mind of the last time that her drunken dad had beat her with the belt buckle end of a belt. And she had screamed out at her dad, and she had said, "Dad, if God ever allows me to have kids, I'll never lay a hand on them." And here she was with her hand raised to do harm to her son. And she couldn't deny that it had something to do with drinking because she had a drink in this hand. And Mike didn't wait for the slap, and it didn't have to happen. And he got in the car, and we went to the softball game. When we got home that night, I knew that something was different because, you see, Shirley was still up. She wasn't passed out. And it's well past her passing out time. We got in the house, and she met us, and she looked at me, and she said, "Bo, I can't go on this way." She said, "I've got to do something about my drinking. I've called a treatment center, and I'm going into treatment." And I reacted today just like I know I was supposed to. With all the sarcasm that I could muster, I looked at her, and I said, "This is number 1,382. What's different this time?" I told her I didn't believe her, and I took a shower and went to bed. And it was the next day at work when this treatment center called me for insurance information that I even believed her. Now, let me tell you, folks, God was directing our lives right then. And we would have told you that God didn't know where we lived. Because God sent us to a treatment center about 40 miles out of Birmingham that believes wholeheartedly in the 12-step programs of AA, Al-Anon, and Alateen. And believes wholeheartedly in treating this thing as a family disease. And there were treatment centers in our area that didn't treat it that way, and we didn't know the difference. And God sent us where we needed to be for just a few short days, where we could turn the corner into your arms, where we've been ever since. Now, I'm going to hurry through this treatment thing because I want to spend a little bit of time on today. But they told us up there about this thing called Family Week, and they wanted me and both kids to come up there because the kids were teenagers and they were old enough. And so at first we weren't going to go, and then the circumstances came that changed us, and we ended up there for Family Week. Now, they call it Family Week. I call it Hell Week because that's what it was. But let me tell you about getting up there on Monday and checking in, and the very first, there was 18 of us family members up there. These other 15 people were representing other patients, and I'd never seen them before in my life. And they hustled us into this group room, and they put us in there to listen to this lecture, all 18 of us. And this person that's up there is giving that lecture. The very first thing I learned up there was that alcoholism is a disease, and that my wife has that disease. And he told us, he said, "I hope you go to Al-Anon because in Al-Anon you're going to learn about the 3 C's. The 3 C's being that you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it." I knew I couldn't control and cure it. I'd darn near run myself crazy trying. What I needed to hear was I didn't cause it. Because you know what I took up there with me? I took that load of guilt. And it was right there that I started the process that I finished in Al-Anon of letting go of that load of guilt. Now, what I learned real quickly in Al-Anon is that alcoholism is a disease. I believe that with all my heart today because I know a whole lot about, I've talked to a whole bunch of y'all, and I've learned a whole lot about the disease. And I know that my wife has that disease, and I know that I didn't cause it. What I've been learning in Al-Anon is that since I didn't cause her to have that disease, I no longer need to try to be able for her recovery from the disease. It's her disease, and in Al-Anon I've learned how to release her and put her in God's lap where her recovery can be between her and the God of her understanding. And guess what that did for old Bo? It freed up untold time and untold amounts of energy for Bo to spend on Bo. Yeah. And that was one of the real important things that happened up there in Hell Week. The other thing is we had that lady came up and held that Al-Anon meeting that night. And she was the one that told me those that stay sober are the ones that go to AA. And then she told me that it's a good idea for them to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And then she looked at me, and she came out of the old school too, just like my old-time sponsors. And this is what I mean by that lady. That lady came up there that night, and she did not come up there and give me options. No. And I hear so much option giving in our programs today. That lady came up there that night, and she gave me good, orderly direction. And that's what I needed in my life at that time. You know, she looked at me. She looked directly at me. I don't know what she did with the other 17 people in that room, because I remember her talking directly to me. And she said, Bo, if you want to regain any of your sanity and begin to experience any serenity, then you're going to go to Al-Anon. Period. End of sentence. She didn't say, I hope you do. She didn't say, I'm here to encourage you to. She didn't use the infamous, why don't you try 6 meetings? No, she looked at me and she said, big boy, if you want what we have, then this is where you're going to go to get it. Thank God for sending me that old-timer that night that gave me that kind of direction. Yeah. Because if she'd have gave me the options of 6 meetings, I know what I'd have done. I'd have used them up and quit. Yeah. Said, well, I went to 6 and it didn't take. She didn't give me that option. The last thing she told me right before the meeting was closed, she said, by the way, if you're going to be any kind of daddy at all, you're going to make sure those 2 kids are introduced to Alateen. Well, guess where the oldest, strongest Alateen group in the state of Alabama was? Right there in Bessemer, where we were headed for our home group. Yeah. So we picked Shirley up at 12 noon that Saturday with instructions to go straight to the Bessemer AA Al-Anon group, where we were going to join a convoy. Now, we used to convoy a lot. Now, young folks in AA today don't know about convoying because we don't do that anymore. Used to, we didn't have a meeting every night of the week on every street corner. And you'd have to travel from city to city to catch these meetings. And you'd meet up and you'd convoy. And you'd have a meeting on the way over there and then have the meeting and then the meeting on the way back. And that's what we met up with down there that day, was a convoy that was going 50 miles on down the road to Tuscaloosa for that anniversary. Now it grows as the story goes. I'm up to 80 vehicles now. I don't really remember how many vehicles there was in that convoy, but I'm sure there must have been at least 80. And we had enough people for 100 vehicles, because there's people crammed in them cars and there was arms and legs hanging out. And we had pickup trucks, we had station wagons, we had Volkswagens, we had sports cars, and not an air conditioner one worked. And it's Labor Day weekend and it's hot. And off to Tuscaloosa we go, where we met you. I've already told you about that, and we fell in love with you. And we came home that night from that anniversary, and me and Shirley and 2 kids sat down in the middle of the living room floor. And the kids had bought her a 2-pound bag of chocolate chip cookies, because they didn't have those in treatment. And we had a gallon of milk. And we sat down in the middle of that floor sometime around midnight or a little after. And this is Shirley's first night home in 38 nights. And me and her and 2 kids sat there in the middle of that floor. And we talked about y'all. And we talked about what we had seen. And we talked about we wanted that. And we talked about it till daylight. And we made a commitment as a family to give this thing our best shot. Now, how do I know we talked about it till daylight? Because that night the curtains were open and the front door was thrown open, and we didn't have you blocked out anymore. And the sun came shining in for the very first time in a long, long time. And we set out on this journey. Shirley got a sponsor, and she started implementing spiritual principles in her life, and she started getting well. I'm floundering around, taking up space in your room and doing nothing, and I'm getting sicker. And for 7 months, I got sicker, and then I got so sick I had to do something, and I got that sponsor, and we got started in the 12 steps. And once I got started in the 12 steps, then spiritual growth began to happen for me, and I began to feel some relief. And it got to the point where I wanted to start doing an inventory. And I couldn't do it. I just couldn't get anything written down. And I went by Jim and Fran's one afternoon, and I walked in and I said, I don't understand this. And Fran said, what is it? I said, I'm trying to write an inventory, and it won't work. I can't get it written down. And she looked at me and she said, son, if you're trying to write an inventory, you're in trouble. I said, where do you get this wisdom? 30 seconds ago, you knew nothing about this. She said, son, if you're trying to do step 4, you're in trouble because you ain't through with step 3. She said, you still got God sitting up there judging you and punishing you, and you're going to have to do something about your concept of God right away. And my AA sponsor, Jim, stood up from the kitchen table and took me by the hand and said, come with me. And he took me into his den, and we sat down at his desk, and he pulled out the textbook, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he opened it to the chapter to the agnostic, and he took me in there. And it was right there that day in Jim D's den in his house, in the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous, that I found the God that I have today. And it's a God of infinite power and of infinite love. Never-ending power, never-ending love, available to me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I know today that God is so busy loving me and forgiving me that he has absolutely no time at all to judge me and punish me if he wanted to. And let me assure you, I keep my God busy loving me and forgiving me. And so I said, now I got this new concept of God. I'm off and running now. And I was running from God. Yeah. Because you see, in that Southern Baptist church, when you turn it over to God, you become a Sunday school director or a choir director or a deacon or a missionary. And I didn't want anything to do with any of that. And so I ran from God. That's exactly what I did. And God loves me so much that he allowed me to run just as hard as I wanted to run. And when I finally ran as far as I could run and hurt as bad as I could hurt, I got up one Wednesday morning and I looked at my wife and I said, I don't want to go to work. She said, well, you got time coming. Why don't you stay home? And I said, I don't want to stay home. She said, what is it you want to do, Bo? I said, Shirley, I'm miserable in my own skin. I don't like me. And I don't know how to get away from me. And she knew she couldn't help me with that. I finally decided that I'd go to work, that I could be miserable there and get paid for it. And I started to work that Wednesday morning, and I tried, and I couldn't make it to work. I pulled my pickup truck out of traffic there on one of the busiest streets in Bessemer, Alabama. And at 5 minutes to 8 that morning, I beat on the steering wheel, and I hollered at God. And this is what I said to God that morning as I beat on that steering wheel. I said, God, I don't know what I got you can use. And God, I don't know where we're going to have to go to use it or what we're going to have to get involved in to make it work. But God, whatever I've got and wherever we got to go and whatever we got to do, let's do it, God. I can't fight you anymore. And I surrendered. As I look back today, I realize that what I did that morning was I fired Bo as the general manager of Bo's life. And I looked around and I hired the best general manager that was available, and that's God. And my biggest job in my recovery since that morning till right now, the biggest job I have is keeping Bo fired and God hired. And as long as I can keep it in that sequence, then we do okay. And spiritual growth began to come in my life, and doors began to open for me to do things in these programs. And I realized that whatever it was that God had for me to do probably wasn't going to be inside the doors of the church. that I was going to be able to carry God's message, and it was going to be in a spiritual field. And that's where I am tonight, in a spiritual arena. Because let me tell you something, folks, there's a power that's generated when we gather in rooms like this. There's a spiritual power that I'm not capable of comprehending. And I just rejoice in being there. I don't have to be up here. I can be out there. And I love being at the source of the power. And that's what this is for me, the source of the power. So I'm off and running now, and things are going good, and I'm beginning to get real busy and real active. And then some things begin to happen in our lives. And some of these things have been tragic things, and I've got to share 2 or 3 of them with you right quick. But I share them with you not because of the tragedy, okay? I share them with you so that I can explain to you what part you played in it and how valuable you have been to me and my family. The first real hard tragedy came May 17th, 1988. We were 5.5 years into this recovery program when our 20-year-old son Mike was killed by a drunk driver. And everything kind of went right out the window real quick. And we're back to square one. I remember the policeman came to the door around midnight, and I remember going to the phone and picking up the phone and calling Fran, Jim and Fran. And I'm talking to Fran on the phone, and I hear Fran telling me, Bo, you've got to hang this phone up. And I said, Fran, I don't know if I can hang this phone up. I got to hang on to you. She said, no, son, you got to hang the phone up. And I said, why have I got to hang the phone up? She said, because I can't come to you while I'm talking to you on the phone. You see, that's the power of this program. That's the power of this way of life. She didn't say, pray about it and we'll have coffee tomorrow. She didn't say, read page so-and-so and we'll discuss it tomorrow. She said, hang up the phone, son, where I can come to you. Let me tell you something. 12 steps in a book is 12 steps in a book. 12 steps on a wall is 12 steps on a wall. 12 steps in action is something to behold. Something to behold. Within 45 minutes of us getting the message of Mike's death, AA and Al-Anon was in our home. And you came and you did something different from the family. And you did something different from the church. You see, they came and left. You came and stayed. 24 hours a day, as long as we needed you there. And you made the decisions that we couldn't make, that we were incapable of making. And you took care of the details that we could not take care of. You came in the door and you looked at us and you said, oh, we're not here with answers now. We don't understand this any more than you. What we know is that you're in pain and that we've got open hearts and open arms and soft shoulders, and we want to put our arms around you and we want to walk with you if you will allow us to do that. And you've been doing that since May 17, 1988. You've been walking with us. You know, I believe today, beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's just no doubt in my mind, that I have walked the deepest, darkest valley that a daddy will ever have to walk. Now, if something were to happen and we lost Sissy, it would be just as deep, and it would be just as dark. But it wouldn't be any deeper, or it wouldn't be any darker. The good news is that I've never taken one step on that journey by myself. Every step of the way through that valley, you've had this hand and God's had this hand. And we've made that walk together. And I came here to learn how to keep my wife sober. Yeah, that's the reason I came here, to learn how to keep my wife sober. Let me tell you about the last time I saw my son alive. He was killed at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I saw him at 7 o'clock that Tuesday morning as he was leaving home, headed to work. 20 years and 6 months old, full of life, loved life. I'm sitting in my chair with a cup of coffee, and he comes by my chair, and he hits me on the shoulder and said, I'm going to work, Dad. Took about 3 steps toward the front door and turned around and looked me square in the eye. He said, I love you, Dad. Out the door he went. And I'm here tonight to thank you for being able to tell the world that the last words I heard my son speak was, I love you, Dad. Because you see, you taught us how to live that way. We learned that from you. Rooms like this full of folks like you. Thank God for AA, Al-Anon, and Alateen. So we began this walk, and we began to go through this thing, and then Sissy falls in love. And pour me some water. And he didn't come riding into her life on the great white steed. He came riding into her life astride the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with 5 years of good 12-step sponsored sobriety. Shirley will tell you about that wedding. I'm going to leave that up to her. All I can tell you is I wish you had been there. I wish you, and a whole bunch of you were. And Bob and Sissy got married, and folks quit coming out to our house. So we sold the big house out in Hueytown with the pool and all that stuff, and we went down 50 miles south of Birmingham out in the middle of the woods and bought us 2 acres. We're land barons. And Bob and Sissy wouldn't let us go to the woods without them. So we bought these 2 acres and cleaned it off and put me and Shirley a house right up on top of the hill, and Bob and Sissy a house down at the foot of the hill. And we live out there on Serenity Hill now. We did that, almost 5 years ago. We've got 2 beagle puppies, and we're looking for an Allapup group. They need it. And life is beginning to come back together a little bit more. And then the second thing hits. June of '99, we found out that Sissy, our precious daughter, has got an aneurysm in her brain. And I go crazy. Shirley gets comfortable with it right quick. Sissy gets comfortable with it right quick. And I go crazy. And let me tell you why I went crazy. When I walked up to my son's casket to say goodbye to him, I was able to say goodbye because all the amends had been made. It was a done deal. It all had been said. And Mike and I were okay. Now, when I heard my daughter had an aneurysm, I had her in the casket. You like that? Yeah. And there was an amend that I had not been able to find a way to make yet. There was one thing left undone. That was the cause of my craziness. I didn't know that at the time. It all came together in a very short period of time. But I'm crazy and I can't get calm. Sissy takes me to see her brain surgeon. We sit down in his office and we talk with him. We found the only brain surgeon in the state of Alabama that doesn't believe he's God. He asked my daughter this question as we were sitting in his office. He said, Sissy, tell me about your relationship with God. He said, because we believe in spiritual healing, and if you don't have a good relationship with God, we don't know whether we can help you that much. Well, 20 minutes later when he said, okay, because here she is, she went into Alateen when she was 13, and she's 32 at that time. She had 19 years of Alateen in Al-Anon. Yeah. She knew about God. She told him about her relationship with God. He looked at her and he looked at me and he said, Dad, we're going to be okay. And I agreed with him that he was the one to do the surgery, but I still couldn't put it to rest. Well, you know the deal. It was in God's hands. So how'd it go? Textbook perfect. Operated her on Tuesday morning, came in her room on Saturday morning and said, pack your bag and get out of my hospital. She said, what do you mean? He said, there's nothing else I can do for you. You are well. You just need to go home and let your scar heal. You ain't got to stay here to do that. And he looked at her and he said, young lady, I have never, ever sent anybody home this soon. He said, but there's nothing else that I can do for you. You are in good hands. Yeah. And he sent her home. 3 weeks after she's home, I get home from work, and she has written a note to her mom, and she's written a note to me. And I sit down in my chair to read my note, and I open it up, and here's what the note says. It says, thank you, Dad, for the God that you have in your life. Thank you, Dad, for being comfortable enough with your God to share him with me. She said, I'll never forget the power and the spiritual power that you have exhibited in your life through this thing. And the comment and the talks that we've had about God. Well, you see, the amend that I couldn't find a way to make was, how do you make an amend to your grown daughter for not taking her to church as a child and allowing her to have a God of her understanding? She never had a God till she got to Alateen. And I'm sitting there and I'm reading the letter, and it dawns on me the amend has been made. It's a done deal. It's a done deal. And Sissy starts recovering, and her hair starts growing back, and she's 2.5 years post-op, and she is fine today. She is beautiful, and she is fine. And then this past December, my back goes out again, and we do the test that we need to do, and I find out that it's not just arthritis, it's more serious than that. And my doctor looks at me and he said, Bo, you're going to have to go to a neurosurgeon. He said, I believe I know the one that you want to go to. I said, yeah, he did a darn good job with my daughter. I don't think I need to look. I think I'm going over there. And I went right back over there to that doctor that believes in God. And I can tell you that the last thing we did that morning before he operated on me was we had prayer. And by golly, I knew it was going to be okay. I came out of that operating room and I woke up and the pain was gone and it has not returned. And I know that I had a spiritual being working on me in that operating room that day. So this kind of, I'm running out of time, and this kind of brings you up to date on where we are today. Here's the deal, though. And I hope, as I've shared these things with you, I hope you've heard me talk about the part that you played in it. Because one of the things I didn't tell you is my personal doctor. He's 12 years sober in AA. And he was the one that sent me to the neurosurgeon. Everywhere we turn and everywhere we go, you're right there. You're right there, and the answer is evident. So that's how vital you are to us. Let me explain it to you this way. I have never seen the burning bush, and I have never experienced the flashing light. But my God speaks to me on a real, regular basis. And as a general rule today, when my God speaks to me, darned if it doesn't look and sound a whole lot like you. That's the reason I got to keep coming back to rooms like this full of folks just like you. You're my contact, you see. This is where the power is generated. There's a power that's generated in rooms like this that my mind is not capable of comprehending. So therefore, I don't try to comprehend it anymore. I just show up and become a part of it. And I try to turn it over to God and do what I'm supposed to do. So if you've got a little bit of an inkling tonight of just how important you are to us, then I'm going to close by making this deal with you. And I've made this deal with some people in this room. So I know that it works. Okay? There's a few people in this room that I've made this deal with. And they know who they are. They know that it works. So here's the deal. I'm going to keep coming back. Rooms like this full of folks just like you. You're part of the deal. I want you to keep coming back. To rooms like this full of folks just like us. Now, if I keep coming back and you keep coming back, then one day, just maybe one day, somewhere, our paths will cross again as we trudge this road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Thank you for having us here.